May I please come in, sir? One.
Take a seat, please. So your good name is Mr. Sahil.
Yes, sir.
Sahil Khare.
Yes.
So what is the meaning of the term Sahil?
So Sahil means a person who can show you the way, who can lead you to the final destination. It is often referred to the seashore as well for a fisherman.
Yeah, it's a tranquil seashore or even a guide. The number of meanings of the term Sahil. So how till now you justify the qualities of Sahil?
So at various stages of my life, I have tried to help people wherever I can. For an example, in my college days, there were a lot of people who came from distant places of MP and who had issues with speaking English. I could help them prepare for their job placements.
Any other way?
So similarly in college itself, sir, there were a lot of people who came from South India. I come from a college that is primarily based in Madhya Pradesh.
Yeah.
So there is a tendency of the teachers to teach in Hindi. And they had mentioned this issue to me. And I had the opportunity to speak to the Chancellor, and I spoke to him. And an executive order in that regard was brought in place. So these are two instances that I can think of right now.
So Mr. Sahil, you belong to Bhopal. Number of your educations are there from Bhopal. So tell me the specialty of the city of Bhopal.
So Bhopal is known as the city of lakes. It is famous for the lakes that it has. Secondly, it is also famous because it was ruled by the queens in a time where most of the principalities were ruled by the kings. And thirdly, sir, it is a very clean city. It consistently ranks in the higher ranks of the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan ranking.
Okay, so Bhopal is known for the lakes. So is there any lake in Bhopal which is in international list?
Sir, the Bhoj Tal or the Bada Lake is a man-made lake that finds place in the Ramsar Convention protected sites.
So historically, who constructed the upper lake?
Sir, Raja Bhoj, the Parmar king, he constructed the...
Okay. And as you mentioned, Bhopal is also ruled for the Begums of Bhopal.
Yes.
So what was the reason the Begums ruled for more than a century in Bhopal?
Sir, the Begums ruled for more than 106 years in Bhopal. So the reason was that there was a treaty that was signed with the Britishers that allowed them that the Britishers would not intervene in this area, and the Begums will continue to show their allegiance towards Bhopal. In this regard, the Begums ruled for a very long time. Secondly, a lot of credit also goes to Dost Muhammad Khan, who was in the military of the Mughals. He gave patronage to the Gaunt queens, and later one of his sons married the queens, which led to the Queen dynasty in Bhopal, and hence it went on with the patronage of local rulers.
And there was no presence of some male heirs who could rule the Bhopal, and daughters were preferred because they were more talented. Okay. So Bhopal is, as you mentioned, famous for Begums. Is there any other thing Bhopal is famous for?
Sir, Bhopal is also famous for Jarda, Garda and Namarda. It is said that it is near the highlands, and hence there is a lot of dust here. It is also famous because since the Queen rule existed here, for the security a lot of homosexuals were present. So we see a large population of homosexuals that is present. It is also famous for some of its cuisines, like a namak wali chai is something that is famous in Bhopal.
The non-veg samosas.
Okay. Yes.
So the old saying, the Garda, Parda, Zarda and
Namarda.
Namarda. Garda, Parda, Zarda, and the Namarda. That's very nice. And Bhopal is also famous for a proverb, Surma Bhopali. So, Sahil, what is Surma Bhopali kind of thing?
Sir, Surma Bhopali is a fictional character that is seen in a lot of films. He is famous for the accent that he has. However, there is no actual person called Surma Bhopali. He is just a fictional character that depicts of the culture of Bhopal.
Yeah, that's really nice. And when Mr. Javed was writing the story of Sholay, actually he was acquainted with a person who was similar to the Surma Bhopali.
Yes.
And when the movie was released and when the character was hit, the character was a big hit. So that particular person on whom he was thinking about, that person made a case against the Javed Khan. Perhaps you are misusing my name.
Yes.
So anyway.
Sir, I will read upon it.
That's really good. You rightly said. And Bhopal is also having the Asia's biggest Vidhan Bhavan, that is Indira Gandhi Vidhan Bhavan. And apart from that, I think you are about to, maybe you may be in the process of mentioning it's famous for Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Manav Sangrahalaya, the Bharat Bhavan, and there are a number of other cultural sites. Okay.
Yes.
The Madhya Pradesh Vidhan Sabha has recently banned the use of around 1100 words. So, can you tell me why these words are banned and what are these words?
Sir, the Vidhan Sabha came up with a resolution after consultations from both the side of opposition and the leading party of certain words that will be considered unparliamentary. This was done to ensure first that the discussion that takes place in accordance with the spirit of the constitution. It, instead of getting politicized, it leads to a logical conclusion, and the time of the house is not wasted in rhetorics. There were a lot of them. Some of them included words like pappu. Some of them were local slangs that were used. All these were banned.
So, do you think, Mr. Sahil, pappu is an unparliamentary word?
Sir, it is not an unparliamentary word. However, its used in the colloquial sense is often seen in a not so good way, and anything that hinders parliamentary debate should be avoided.
So your father is is he currently working as an executive director of Asian Development Bank?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what is the basic functioning of Asian Development Bank?
So the Asian Development Bank is a regional development bank. It works on three pillars. One is poverty elevation, second is shared prosperity, and third is environmental sustainability. It ensures that there is sufficient credit flow to various countries in the region, so that these developing countries can perform better and have a good quality of life.
So, Mr. Sahil, why it is known as the Asian Development Bank? Around 1.5 dozen of its countries belong to non-Asian.
So the idea of the Asian Development Bank, as established in 1967, was to serve the nation better. However, with time we have seen that various other countries which have interest in the region are also non-regional members. However, the main focus of the Development Bank continues to be Asia and its shared prosperity.
So, Mr. Sahil, currently in Asia there is a crisis in Afghanistan. So, in that case, can you tell me the role of Asian Development Bank?
Sir, I am not aware of it right now.
So the World Bank has currently suspended the grants, whatever aids are there because of the current turmoil in Taliban, and similarly the Asian Development Bank is also following the same suit. So currently no such decision has been taken to go ahead with the funds or development aids to the Afghanistan.
Thank you, sir. I'll read upon it.
Yeah. So day before yesterday, 2 days back, there was a suicide serial attack in Afghanistan. So what might be the reasons for such attacks?
So there are various possibilities. First, it has been attributed to Islamic State Khorasan province. It indicates that there are other players than Taliban that exist in the region that want to show their dominance. Secondly, it also confirms the apprehension that there are non-state actors in place which can hinder peace in the long term. Thirdly, it has also raised apprehensions about Taliban's commitment that the land will not be used by other non-state actors for their own personal gains and to promote terrorism.
So what was the reason that Islamic State of Khorasan had gone for such an attack, although Taliban was not a part of such attack? So what could be the special reason for this?
Sir, the general reason that is being attributed to this is that their ideology is different from the Taliban, which is being seen as a major player. The Islamic State Khorasan province believes that the Taliban are not strict followers of Islam, that is of the Salafi Muslim community. Secondly, they also believe in creation of a caliphate, which is much bigger than an elected government based on Sharia law.
So Islamic State of Khorasan. So where is this Khorasan?
So Khorasan is an ancient civilizational region in the eastern region of Iran. It also includes areas of Turkmenistan and other Central Asian countries.
So another main probable reason which is told is the Islamic State of Khorasan, which is actually a neighboring organization, because next to Afghanistan is the eastern part of Iran, which is currently there. This Islamic State of Iraq and Khorasan is very active. So this organization wants its due share in the revenue and the power. And it's believed that this organization is believing that Taliban is pro-US, whereas for Islamic State, US is one of the biggest enemy. So to get the proper revenues, to get the proper attention, it specially designed its attack against America. And since it is an attack against US, so it is also an attack side by side against the Taliban. So it destabilizes their power in whatever power they are enjoying in Afghanistan. So what is the role of India in case of the current situation in Afghanistan?
Sir, there are certain issues of priorities that India should be playing a major role in. First is evacuation of its own citizens who are stranded there. Secondly, India has made a lot of investments in the region which need to be protected. Thirdly, India should engage with the like-minded players in the region to ensure that an inclusive democratic government is put in place. Fourthly, India should ensure that there are no ungoverned spaces that can be used by newer non-state actors that can pose a threat to the security in the region.
So is India having directly dialogues with the Taliban?
India does not have direct relations with the Taliban. However, India was a part of the Doha summit that took place for the intra-Afghan negotiations.
And has India gone for some negotiations with Russia on this issue?
India and Russia recently had a bilateral meeting in which it was suggested that there will be a permanent channel to see how the situation will evolve. Apart from that, India is also a part of the BRICS, and BRICS has a special group on Afghanistan where India engages with Russia to deal with the emerging security threat in the region.
What is the basic difference between India and Russia on Taliban issue?
So Taliban has suggested, Russia has suggested that they are open to negotiations with the Taliban. However, India has not given any official statement in that regard.
Russia, China, US, their embassies are still working. They are in a position to have dialogues, whereas India has closed the embassy. India, France, other countries, they have closed their embassies. So this is the basic difference. Okay. Why China is taking interest in current situation in Afghanistan?
So there are multiple reasons why China is interested in the region. Firstly, this region is an important part for its connectivity projects that exists, especially the CPEC and connecting the same with the BRI. Secondly, there are factions like the East Turkmenistan Islamic movement that pose a threat to the Uyghur region instability in the Xinjiang province. Thirdly, it is also a part of Chinese strategy to emerge as a net security provider in the region, and hence China wants to play an active role.
So, what is the impact of Indian trade in the current scenario in Afghanistan?
Sir, in terms of trade with Afghanistan, since the borders in the recent times have been disputed, India is largely dependent on trade to Afghanistan via transit from Pakistan, and hence this is one major issue that exists.
So, India and Afghanistan trade via Pakistan route have been currently suspended by the Taliban, whereas India's trade with Afghanistan via other routes like the Dubai route and the other corridor route, that is still being continued.
Okay, sir.
The Islamic nations, they normally talk about the human right violation in Kashmir. Why don't they talk about the human right violation in Uyghur regions of China?
So, the Islamic movements.
Islamic nations, why don't they raise voice?
So there are multiple reasons. First is the geopolitics that is involved. We have seen that there is a constant struggle for dominating the Islamic world. We see that there are players like Saudi Arabia, there are players like Turkey who want to, and Iran, who want to emerge as active players in the region, and hence we see statements like that of Turkey on Afghanistan, on that of Kashmir. However, we don't see the same in terms of the Uyghur regions that take place. Secondly, there is also other vested interests in the region, right from the trade that takes place, right from the trade that takes place and the Shia-Sunni conflict that exists.
So it's a game of vested interest, actually, what you rightly said. So currently the India government is going for a big, huge scheme, that is National Monetization Pipeline. So what kind of monetization it is having, and what could be the benefits of this project?
So the National Asset Monetization Pipeline deals with monetization of brownfield investments that can go to the private players via concessionaire agreements or any other methods like investment ITs and RITs. This will ensure one, revenue to the government. Second, the assets that have been lying idle for a very long time, they can be utilized. Thirdly, it will ensure that the idle assets are maintained well, which are facing depreciation at this point of time.
So in monetization, will government sell these shares or they will just give them on rent?
So these assets will be leased out to the private players for a fixed period of time with fixed conditions of use. A part of the revenue that is generated from the use of these assets will come to the government. After the lease period expires, the assets will again be transferred to the government, but all this while the ownership of the assets will remain with the government.
What could be the big hurdle in the current project regarding the dispute resolution mechanism?
Sir, in terms of the national monetization,
In general, in this way also and other way also, when the private player they work with the government through PPP project or this kind of thing. So if there is a dispute, so what could be the main trouble in that?
so one is that there are multiple regulators in place. So if the investment is via mutual funds or investment ITs, then SEBI is involved. If IRDA is involved, if IRDA can also be involved. Second is that in terms of dispute resolution, it will have to be agreed which form of dispute resolution has to be catered into. It has to be clearly mentioned in the contract. There is a tendency to go for courts which might lead to delays. There is a need to go for the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. Thirdly, when these delays will happen, there will be costs that will be incurred. It is not known who will be responsible for the costs that arise.
There must be some fast track mechanism, focus mechanism. So you have gone for a project, an environmental sustainability initiative center for environment education. So what is environmental sustainability?
Sir, environmental sustainability refers to sustaining the progress that we have made in terms of upkeep of the environment while adopting the kind of development projects, development of human needs that are present. It is often defined as developing, keeping in the minds of the present generation without compromising the needs of the future generation to meet their needs as well.
So India is currently agreed to sign the Kigali Amendment. So what is Kigali Amendment and how is it the same as the Montreal Protocol or it is having some difference with that?
Sir, India has recently ratified the Kigali Agreement, which deals with HFCs, eradication of the HFCs. Montreal Protocol dealt with ozone depleting substances, whereas HFCs were not a part of it because they were largely seen as non-depleting. They were seen as not depleting the ODS, but it was later realized that HFCs can still cause global warming, and hence they need to be eradicated, and an additional protocol called Kigali was put in place.
Correct, very correct. Montreal were related with the CFCs, and that time the hydro part were not covered, and now the Kigali that that covers the HFCs. Very correct. So you also play tabla.
Yes, sir.
So how many, what is your specialty when you play with the tabla like?
Sir, I have learned tabla for 2 years. So I have a command over the basic tals that exist. The tals that I use the most are the teen tal and the kerwa tal, because the theka of these tals, which is the pure form, is easier and it allows for a lot of prakars, that is a lot of variations. So that will be my speciality, to hover the kaidas around these two tals.
If interview board asks you to play tabla on the table and take out these tals,
yes sir, I can do it.
So Mr. Sahil, how tabla could have been invented in historic times?
Sir, it is said that tabla is invented from the pakhwaj. The pakhwaj was used in the Carnatic music. However, it was not suited for faster playing. When the Muslim rulers came to India, it was required that khayal music and bandishes were played, which required faster playing of the tabla, and hence it is said that the pakhwaj was cut from between and tabla was created.
Who could be the person who might be credited for this?
Sir, it is not known as to who created the tabla. There is a line of thought that suggests that the Muslim rulers, when they came to India, they needed war drums and they created the tabla. However, there is another line of thought that says that tabla is of an indigenous origin, which can be seen in Bhaj caves in Pune, or mentioned in the Silapadikaram in the Sangam literature. However, it is disputed.
So, as you rightly mentioned, in south there is the Mridangam, and the northern India, the same Mridangam is known as Pakhavaj. So it might be created in the early medieval times by cutting the Pakhavaj, say whatever we call it in the north, or say the Mridangam in the south. And although there are a number of stories, but one very strong story is that it might be created by Amir Khusro. So this is a stronger story, but mostly these are all stories.
Sir, I'll read upon it, sir.
Mr. Sahil, being a student of law, do you think that India should go for specialization of judiciary rather than going for tribunalization?
Sorry, sir, I could not understand the question. If you could rephrase it, please.
Okay, chalo. Let me ask it another way. Normally, it is said that the tribunalization is a ploy of bureaucrats to adjust them in their post-retirement time. So, do you think that tribunalization is a ploy of bureaucrats?
Sir, I feel that the tribunalization, the concept of tribunals emerged with a larger set of aims. First was to allow speedy redressal of cases, to reduce the pendency in the courts. Second is to allow a procedure that is not very strict and it can be based on principles of natural justice. This allows the tribunals to also have people of the executive who might have domain expertise in the region. Hence, it would be wrong to suggest that tribunalization has been created to benefit the executive, but it is for a larger cause, that is to ensure that the justice that is delivered is speedy in nature.
Mr. Sahil, in Indian Constitution, there is written that there should be separation of judiciary and executive. Don't you think? When we create a tribunal, we are moving apart from our Constitution, moving away from the spirit of the Constitution.
Sir, it is a part of the directive principles of state policy, and wherever it is possible, there is a separation of powers. However, in Indian context, when we speak of separation, it is a model that is of checks and balances, and hence in the tribunal system, this has been ensured. The chairman of a tribunal is generally a person from a judicial background who is or was a judge in the previous times, and apart from that, people who are selected are from the executive who have domain knowledge, and hence it is not a violation of the separation of powers.
So recently a bill is pending related with the tribunals reform bill. So why this bill is brought?
Sir, the tribunals reform bill was brought in to allow faster filling of vacancies. This allowed the government to put in qualifications based on which the various vacancies of the tribunals will be filled. However, it has been struck down by the Supreme Court, saying that it is use of excessive power by the government, and the conditions that have been imposed for the qualifications of the members are not fair and reasonable, and the government will both be a party as well as an arbiter in the present matter, and hence the bill has been pending.
It want to reduce the number of tribunals also from 26 to 19, because in High Court level that could have been easily done. Okay. So in the current session which was going on of Indian Parliament, there was an insolvency and bankruptcy code was also brought. So my question number one is, what is the difference between insolvency and bankruptcy? Now second part is why this is brought.
So the bankruptcy is a status that is ascribed to a person who turns bankrupt. However, insolvency refers to the process that goes on after a person has been declared bankrupt, whether it is dissolution of the assets that is has to in order to pay the dues that are pending. The insolvency code which came allows for this resolution of such stressed assets. It has created a series of professionals who can specialize in matters of insolvency. It also allows transfer of control to the committee of creditors who were largely seen as ignored and had to rely on the court for ensuring justice.
I'm asking about the recent bill which is brought few weeks back in the parliament. So that is basically deals with the micro, small enterprises. For them, this is.
Yes, sir. In that regard, the IBC amendment that has been brought in allows for pre-packs in terms of MSME. Right now, we see that these MSMEs, when they go through the insolvency process, they lose control over the business, which often leads to shutdown of these businesses. It was seen that if pre-packs are allowed and these are allowed to retain and investors are allowed to be brought in, these businesses can be revived in a more efficient manner.
Very right. So for insolvency resolution, we are two kind of bodies. One is NCLT, another is the DRT. So how the jurisdiction of the two are different?
Sorry, sir, I am not aware about the same.
If it is a case of an individual, that is decided by DRT, Debt Recovery Tribunal. If it is a case of a company, then it is seen by National Company Law Tribunal, NCLT, DRT. Both function in the same way. For non-company or individual, DRT. For company, NCLT. So this is the difference between the two.
Thank you, sir. I'll read upon it.
Welcome. So, Mr. Sahil, currently for the August month, India is the chairman of United Nations Security Council. So, what benefits India can take for such a good position?
So, there are various benefits of being on the UNSC non-permanent member and being a chair of the same. Firstly, it allows India to be a part of global decision making. Secondly, it allows India to maneuver the agenda which needs to be talked about, and India has done that in terms of Afghanistan, maritime security. Thirdly, it also allows India to push forward its call for the reform of the United Nations Security Council. Fourthly, it also allows India to represent the regional issues of the Asia Pacific region at a global level.
The RBI and the government, their stand sometimes seems to be different on cryptocurrency or digital currency. Now my question is, what is the current stand of RBI on digital currency or say the cryptocurrency?
Sir, there was an order in 2018 by the RBI which said that cryptocurrencies are illegal in nature, after which the Supreme Court has struck down the order. The current stand of the Reserve Bank of India is that there should be a central cryptocurrency, and private cryptocurrency should not be allowed in the country. However, there is no official order to that effect. The government, on the other hand, has taken a wait and watch approach and is engaging with the RBI in the matter. However, it has explicitly said that under the current law, dealing in cryptocurrencies is not illegal.
The cryptocurrency transactions are going on in India. The stand of the government is not very clear. The government seems to be more favorable in allowing it because it will increase the volume, whereas RBI seems to be more cautious. the RBI has declared to be issuing its own digital currency. Now, my next question. Is digital currency and cryptocurrency same, or there will be some difference?
So digital currency and cryptocurrency are not same. Cryptocurrency is a peer-to-peer lending, which does not. It is an example of peer-to-peer lending, which does not involve the government at all, and it is based on a distributed ledger technology.
Is it based on peer-to-peer lending? Are you sure?
It is a peer-to-peer currency, which is based on distributed ledger technology, whereby various nodes automatically approve of the transactions, whereas the digital currency that will be brought in will be a regulated currency by the Reserve Bank of India.
Currently, one of the biggest businessmen of the world is said to be another Harshad Mehta. So, who is that industrialist, and what could be the case?
Sorry, sir, I am not aware.
The founder of SpaceX, Tesla, Elon Musk, he declared that whatever Tesla he will sell, in return he will accept the cryptocurrency for that. But later on he took his stand back. But still, he is sending a satellite, and he will say that in return I'll accept the cryptocurrency Dogecoin. He is said to be promoting, and as soon as he declared in favor of Dogecoin, the prices of the Dogecoin, they just skyrocketed. So there are newses in media. Is there another Harshad Mehta for Dogecoin? What are the benefits if a country like India, if it adopts a digital currency or a cryptocurrency?
So there are multiple benefits if a digital currency is adopted in India. Firstly, it will save the printing costs that are associated with printing with physical currency. Secondly, there are issues where there is wear and tear of the notes that take place, that will also be removed. Thirdly, it allows for a greater scope of financial inclusion, because this currency can be transferred to the remote parts of India. Fourthly, and more importantly, it allows newer ways of policy interventions by the government in terms of direct benefit transfers that take place. A digital currency would allow it to happen in a more efficient manner and also reduce the leakages involved in the process.
And the time and the money involved in using the middleman will be also less.
Yes.
Take. Currently in the COVID situation, government is set to promote the fiscal stimulus package. So what is exactly in the fiscal stimulus? If a government is set to declare a fiscal stimulus, in general, what is a fiscal stimulus?
So the fiscal stimulus are tax incentives that are provided by the government to the people in various ways. We have seen that the government has allowed for fiscal incentives. First, in terms of any COVID relief grants that a person has got from abroad, those have been exempted. Similarly, we have seen that import of oxygen cylinders, which were used for not for personal use but for the use in various hospitals and by NGOs, have been exempted. Similarly, fiscal measures also include easing tax filing norms, which have been delayed.
Our current Prime Minister wants Indian economy to be in the club of the $5 trillion economy. Tell me any 4 or 5 steps India should take in order, if India wants to be a member of this elite club.
So there are some steps that India can take to be in this elite club. Firstly, India has to focus on skilling the existing labor that exists. We have a very rich demographic dividend which can be used for skilling. Secondly, we need to work on creating supply chain in resilient supply chain infrastructures which will increase the market connect to that of producers. Thirdly, India should invest in the technology that exists, better technology transfer and investment in research and development can allow increasing of production. Fourthly, there is a need to monetize the agricultural sector more, where we have a large population, large section of population working.
You belong to Madhya Pradesh, and currently one incident happened in one of the district of Madhya Pradesh in which there are certain people of a section, they shouted pro-Pakistan slogans. If you would be the administration, if you would be the DM of such a district, how you could have handled such a situation?
So, firstly, there is a need to see what had actually happened. If there were a lot of people that were involved, Section 144 can be imposed to prevent the unlawful assembly. Secondly, what can be done is to speak to the people that such slogans should not be chanted. Thirdly, is to have deployments in the region. There can be a rapid action van that can be stationed in the region in case there is any in case the matter goes out of control. There is sufficient support that exists.
Right, being the DM of such a district, which is used to be the one of the important working place of SIMMI, I would have been enhanced the intelligence of such district, and especially on certain communal festivity, if that intelligence could have worked properly, such events could have been averted.
Yes.
Apart from after following whatever you said, and 144, that's correct again.
Sir, I think Section 153A also can be imposed for preventing promotion of enmity between different classes. However, that will not be a preventive step, it can only be a punitive step.
So, Mr. Sahil, can you tell me what is the basic difference between the human rights and the fundamental rights?
Sir, human rights are those rights which are integrally linked to the bodily integrity of a human and its existence. Fundamental rights are specific rights that are fundamental to the good life that can exist, that an individual can have. The fundamental, some of the human rights are fundamental rights. However, fundamental rights is a wider criteria, and it also includes other rights like those dealing with right to practice your religion, protection to communities, etc.
In one way, human rights are broader. In another way, fundamental rights are broader. The human rights are n number of rights. With the increase in time, increase in civilization, the human rights also increase. In Indian Constitution, well, at the time of the Constitution, certain rights were put in the directive principles because that time they could not be implemented. And whatever rights, human rights could be implemented, more number of those rights could be put in the fundamental rights. As the time is growing, we are having more resources, we are putting our human rights into more fundamental rights. What is the basic difference between right to work and right to education in respect with all these rights, different rights? Right to work and right to education.
So, right to education is a fundamental right enshrined under Article 21A of the Constitution, whereas right to work right now forms a part of the directive principles of state policy. Uh, However, in various judgments of the Supreme Court, we have seen that the right to work has been read to be a fundamental right under Article 21. But the larger jurisprudence suggests that one is a fundamental right and the other is an obligation on the state to do it as much as possible to provide right to work to people.
Right to work is currently a statutory right, which is protected by the Statute 2005. And as you rightly said, the right to education is now a fundamental right. Take. In India, there is a growing privatization by the current government. So, from after independence, we see there is a nationalization, and after that, we are finding the disinvestment process that is going on in India. So why this reversal is there? What could be the forcing reasons for this reversal?
So there are multiple reasons why we see a change in approach of government towards the industry. At the time of independence, India's priorities were different. There was a need for the government to invest in heavy industries, create employment, and hence we see there was a proliferation of a lot of PSUs that existed. Secondly, there were other additional reasons like in terms of banks, there was a need of priority sector lending so that some particular sectors of the society can develop well. Now we have seen that the relationship between the government and the industry has evolved. The trust that people have in the industry has also increased, and hence now we see the government wanting the private sector to play a more important role. This will allow firstly better utilization of the existing resources, secondly bring in global best practices, thirdly reduce costs, and fourthly allow investment in fixed assets which the government can only do to a limited extent.
So these are the guiding principles, forcing principles, which are pushing the government to go with the privatization plan. Okay.
Yes.
So what is PSU, and is PSU and public limited companies the same or they are different?
So the PSUs are the state-owned companies. All units where the government share is more than 50% are known as public sector undertakings. They are generally created to further public welfare in a socially important sector, whereas a public company refers to any company where the shares can be subscribed by the public. It is not held by the government, but also private players can start a public company.
In both segments there is a term public, but in public sector the term public is ownership, as you have rightly mentioned, and whereas in public limited company the public tells that the wide ownership of the public. That's correct. A recent step is taken by the government for the corporatization of the Ordnance Factory Board. Why government has gone for the corporatization of the Ordnance Factory Board?
Sir, there are various reasons why corporatization of the Ordnance Factory Board has been seen. First is that corporatization will bring in the principles of a corporate, which will allow better efficiency in the production of defense production. Firstly, it will allow if it is driven by profits, it will help in reduction of the costs. Secondly, better technology will come in, and thirdly, it will allow performance-based assessment of various verticals that are working in the corporates, and this would make it more efficient in its working. And fourthly, there is also an aim to increase defense exports and defense production. It will be in line with that policy as well.
And government has also taken for the privatization of space. Why so privatization of space? Don't you think it's a strategic field?
Sir, in the recent privatization policy, the space continues to be a strategic sector, where only limited privatization is allowed. Privatization has been allowed in space via the INSCAPE company that has been INSCAPE organization that has been created under ISRO. Okay, sir, I'll read upon it. In this, it will be used in launching of the vehicles, development of components of this of the spacecraft. However, and also sending small satellites that are created by the private sector, or taking their inputs in the emerging technologies in the sector. However, the control over the strategic assets, launching facilities continues to remain with the government.
As you rightly said, ISRO will go ahead with the fundamental activity, whereas the activity in space related with the private sector will be subjected to the approval of IN-SPACe. And there was a need because all over the world there is a growing privatization. People are developing their spacecraft. They are taking, they are helping NASA, like SpaceX. Like people are going in the space. There is a growing market of space tourism. So why not Indian companies can take advantage of space tourism, the growing space industry. So that's why we have taken step. Although it is late, but let us hope with the shining Indian technology and the entrepreneurship, we will very shortly will unfurl our flag in space. That's true. And last question, which part of history you think is your sweetest? Ancient, medieval, modern, any part?
Modern history, sir.
Modern history. Take any moment of your choice.
So the time when Gandhi was in India around 1915 to the start of Quit India movement.
Tell me the innovations of the Quit India movement. Any 4 or 5 innovations.
Sir, if I could have a minute to. Sir, I could think of 2 of them. One is that it was seen as a change in the strategy of Mahatma Gandhi, which was seen as an innovation. There was a call of do or die, instead of Gandhi's pacifist approach towards freedom struggle before, which called for having self-restraint in the way things were functioning. Second innovation can be, he had said that even if there is no leader that is left, and the movement has to go on its own. Apart from that, sir, in this particular phase, I am not aware of more innovation.
In Quit India movement, for the first time, we didn't ask anything from the British. We declared British, you quit India. That is itself an innovation.
Yes, sir.
अंग्रेजों तुम भारत छोड़ दो. Number 1, it's a declaration. Number 2, as you have rightly mentioned, prior to that there were leaders, individuals. The Gandhiji clearly understood the possible course of action, and he declared that the masses will be the leader. So decentralization.
Yes.
Number 1, Quit India. Number 2, masses were the leader. Number 3, our demand change. And what is the new Indian declaration? Nothing less than complete independence. Number 4, for the first time, Indian nationalists had gone for a parallel government. That means they occupied the DM office, the SP office, took back the Union Jack, and they unfurled the Indian triangle. And there are other also innovations, but these are certainly the clear-cut innovations. Tell me any 3 specialties why you should be selected for civil services.
So the one is hard work. Once I understand what I want to do, I give it my all. Second is leadership. I have worked in various teams across as teams, and I know that I can be a good leader. I have the capacity to take everybody along. And third is communication skills. I think that it is very important today to have people-centric governance, and my communication skills can be of help in the services. And fourth is innovation. I always try to think of a better way to do things, which will allow me to work within the existing systems and better them for the welfare of the people.
And your knowledge of law will also work you to go ahead in the right protocol.
Yes, sir.
That is you are having an edge in that.
Yes.
Because most of the administrative matter, the matter of law is involved.
Yes.
So you can have an edge over this thing. Any 3 weaknesses you would like to improve?
So the first weakness, according to me, is procrastination. At times I delay decision making, and there is sense of indecision that exists. Secondly, I tend to overplan things. Which at times causes hindrance. And third weakness, sir, I can only think of 2 right now.
2 right, okay, that will like. ठीक. So your interview is over now.